Sure all the streams are working. I accidentally closed the tab, of course. Hello, everyone. We should be live. Just going to make sure that we're up on the streams today. And for anyone watching, let us know in the chat how you're doing. It's also really fun to always kind of see where people are watching from. So if you don't know what else to say in the chat, throw in where you're watching from. It's really fun to hear that and see where everyone's tuning in from. I'm from Seattle myself. Steven, where are you at?
I'm in Columbus, Ohio.
Nice.
Yeah.
All right. We're live. We'll wait, I think, just a few minutes before we get a little bit more into the conversation.
Sure.
So again, anyone joining, definitely feel free to say hello. It's always really cool to see where everyone's joining from. Someone said they're watching from San Francisco. Nice. I used to go to San Francisco several times a year, and then I haven't been since COVID, basically, but I'm going next week for ODSC West, so I'm really excited to be back down there, and I can't wait.
Nice.
All right, so I'll go ahead and just get started with a quick introduction before we get into some of the conversations. My name is Sage Elliott. I'll be the host for today's Robust and Responsible AI event. We're a community of AI and machine learning practitioners, researchers, designers, and much more. The group really is just kind of everyone working in all areas of data or machine learning. You can think of the event today as kind of a live podcast. I'll be interviewing a guest with some questions around kind of a loose topic, I think, today around data and MLOps. And then hopefully we'll have some time for questions at the end if people want to throw them in. But I always encourage, while you're watching, go ahead and put stuff in the chat. We might see it, or other people might see it, and it's really fun to stay connected and kind of have a live conversation around what other people are talking about. And if you ever want to come on for an event, feel free to ping me on Slack or LinkedIn. You can find those links in the description below. And today, we have our guest, Stephen Bailey, to talk with us about data and MLOps, I think specifically a little bit at Whatnot. Stephen has a really cool background. And instead of me listing out some of the cool stuff, I'd love it if you want to introduce yourself, Stephen.
Yeah, sure. So I guess from a personal history perspective, I did my undergraduate degree in chemistry and philosophy, and kind of did a couple of operational business type of jobs afterwards until deciding to jump back into academic research. And that's really where my career in data started. I did a PhD in cognitive neuroscience at Vanderbilt. And what was really fun about that experience was I learned, you learn the scientific process, you learn some interesting domain knowledge. For me, it was like how kids learn to read and how the brain changes with reading. But then you also get to play with all these fun tools like medical, like MRI images, high performance compute clusters, and you kind of play with all these tools in order to publish a little chart at the end that goes into a paper. And what I found through that was I just really loved the tooling. And so, from that sort of high performance compute background and medical image analysis background, moved into a role at a company called Immuta, did some data science, and was kind of like the first data hire there, jumping around. I did some revenue operations. I did some data warehousing stuff. I did some actual data science experimentation stuff. And now I'm kind of swinging back a little bit towards the machine learning and more advanced analytics use cases at Whatnot. Whatnot is a really, really fun place to work in data because we have so many interesting problems. And I can go more into detail about Whatnot specifically a little bit. But yeah, now I'm a data engineer focused very much on the data platform side of things and making data available for use in all sorts of different use cases, whether it's machine learning or just regular analytics, whether it's experimentation or operational use cases. We sort of have all of the opportunities here.
That's cool. How do you you've gone back and forth a little bit more on the ML side and data engineering side. I assume and maybe you're doing a mix of both. Is there things you like more about kind of one field over the other? Or let's say maybe someone was trying to think if they wanted to get into data engineering versus machine learning engineering, what's maybe something they would want to think about?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think what has always excited me is solving the problem. And so when I was doing my PhD, and the academic problem was how can we understand how kids' brains change as they learn to read. Like there's a certain toolkit that you can use to solve that problem, and that's a statistical toolkit. It's a compute and engineering toolkit. It's a data processing toolkit, and all of it is in the service of that sort of final goal. And then when I was the first data hire at Amuda, it was the same situation. It was like, what is the business problem right now? How can we solve it in the fastest way possible, in a way that is also like an actual solution to the problem? Maybe it's an 80% solution, but it's not sort of like it's beyond just guesswork. And so my recommendation to anybody who's getting into the field of data, even if you love the techniques, like find a place where you can solve problems and then find the right solution to the problem, and build out your toolkit that way, because that will help you, feel successful and not like a sort of like closet data person that's just kind of like building toys and crying because no one's using them.
Yeah, I think the rewarding feeling of solving problems is pretty important for you to stay happy in your career. So I like the idea of going in somewhere like you were saying, and then building out a toolkit and kind of finding out what you enjoy doing that way. Yeah,
and I think one of the things that when I was working at a B2B, a business to business SaaS company, the problems that we needed to solve were somewhat more fundamental, but they're still very complicated. Like calculating monthly recurring revenue in a business to business company with a like SaaS subscription model is very complicated. It's not like an easy problem to solve. You don't need Bayesian modeling for it, but you do need to think really, really hard and like draw a bunch of like entity relationship diagrams and get very complicated. I think what's been fun at Whatnot, and I don't think I explained what Whatnot is. Whatnot is a live stream e-commerce platform. So you can think of it like eBay meets Twitch, and it's all real-time sales. So like an auction will go up, if we were on Whatnot right now, we could auction this, cup of water right now and have bidding start at $1, and then it'll just go up to whatever people bid on it. So we have like real-time applications, we have live stream video, we have community and like chat messages coming in. We have the actual order data and sort of the dynamics around auctions. And so we have like all the problems that we have, all the opportunities that eBay has. We have all the opportunities that Twitch has. We also have all the problems of both. And what I didn't appreciate, or what I now appreciate moving into this like business consumer world, is that the machine learning investment is very much the right solution to the problem a lot of times. It's easy to kind of stand on the other side of the fence and work in like a slower moving business to business company and say, oh, why would we even, MLOps is so overblown, machine learning models, like we don't need these things. Let's just use an if-then statement, but it's all about the problems you're trying to solve. And when you're thinking about scale, when you're thinking about speed, when you're thinking about like, just automation, like machine learning is the way to solve these problems, and it's a good investment.
Cool. What was I gonna say? Oh, so I think this is great. We can start to transition into before we talk about Whatnot a little bit more and the specific problems there. Maybe we could define a little bit like what is DataOps or MLOps for people who maybe are kind of newer to the terms, or maybe what it means kind of in the context of Whatnot, and then we'll go into a little bit more of like some of those problems that you're solving.
Yeah. I can give you kind of I'll give you what I think of when I think of DataOps and MLOps and sort of the distinction. By no means is this an authoritative definition, but I tend to think of DataOps as all of the supporting processes it takes to make the repurposing of data efficient. So like if you think of data lives in one, part of the business, we want to use it for some other purpose. Usually that involves some transformation. It involves some movement from one system to another. It involves the creation of endpoints, like, all of these processes that support the movement that aren't like specific to a specific pipeline, I would think of as like data operational support processes. MLOps, I think, sits on top of that a little bit, because usually to deploy a machine learning model, or to use predictions from machine learning models, you have to have that data movement. Data has to be repurposed somehow. And so you have all those processes I just mentioned, but you also have a lot more complexity around both the development environment for machine learning and the exposing or the serving of those models. And so I would say those are the two big differences. I'd say, standing up a experimentation environment and a way to deploy infrastructure to serve stuff is very much its own category of problem that an engineer, like a data engineer or a machine learning engineer, has to solve for. It's similar to standing up pipelines. There's sort of like an orchestration and a scheduling and a base infrastructure part, but there's enough differentiation that I think it deserves its own sort of category.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Whenever you add models in, there's another layer of complexity for deploying and making sure that those models, I guess, don't degrade over time or anything like that.
Yeah.
Awesome. And so let's get into a little bit more about what you're working on and maybe some of the interesting things at Whatnot or that you've seen in other parts of your career. But real quick, I will note, because Whatnot sounds really interesting has really interesting problems to work on, that you are hiring as well. And the link to the hiring page is in the description in YouTube or wherever you're watching the stream right now.
Yep. We're hiring new grads. We're hiring machine learning folks. We're hiring data platform folks. We're hiring analysts and data scientists. So do hop in the careers page.
So if you want to work in data and solve interesting problems, even if you're a new grad, it sounds like Whatnot could be a really good place.
Yep.
And you get to work with Steven. So
yeah, that's right.
All right. Maybe let's go and hear a little bit more about some of the stuff you're working on. If you can share a little bit more details about stuff, interesting things at Whatnot, or if you want to share, other challenges that you've seen in other projects before, and how people could maybe think about solving them.
Yeah, I think what I can share, what's probably interesting is some of our journey from like a year and a half ago, from our first data hires to now, and how the data platform that we're building is really, we're trying to make it multi-purpose and really make sure that as much of the platform is reusable across machine learning use cases and analytics use cases and operational use cases, so that we don't get this world where like machine learning is its own one corner of the business and then analytics is some other corner of the business and data engineers are just like running back and forth trying to fulfill tickets, because we are like, what I've really loved about Whatnot is coming in on the ground floor. We had two initial data hires, like a machine learning and data platforms person, and then named Emmanuel, and then our analytics lead named Evan. And they did a fantastic job of setting up the data stack at the company in a way that was growable, like evolvable over time. And that has made all the difference in us being able to move very quickly as a team and grow. So we had like Snowflake, we had dbt, we had Airflow, we had everything in code very early on. And as the platform has grown, our dbt project, and people who don't know about dbt, maybe more on the machine learning side, dbt is a way of kind of declaratively creating transformation logic in a data warehouse. That our dbt project basically serves as the bus for all data that comes into Snowflake and feeds into any sort of application for the business. And so what we've done is we've had kind of like wave after wave, and on our team, we think of them in sort of like versions of the platform, where we will incrementally improve and make sure that we're governing and like sort of refactor the platform to make sure that we're recycling logic as much as possible, whether those are features in machine learning models, being concordant with like how we define key metrics in the application for the analytics purposes, or whether it's customer facing data products like dashboards for sellers. Like we want all of those products to kind of come from the same place. And so that's been one of the biggest efforts that we've had just recently. And it's just sort of an ongoing effort. The data platform is serving all of these different use cases. One of the recent things we just did was migrate onto AWS SageMaker. So we're now serving all of our machine learning models through the SageMaker utility, but we made a very intentional decision to marry that up with our orchestrator, Dagster. And so we keep a lot of the central platform logic in one single system. And then we orchestrate all of our components of the project through the different systems like SageMaker, Sigma, dbt Cloud, ingestion processes and stuff. And that has made a huge difference in the ability for our small team. We have, I think, 5 people right now, to understand and act on what's happening out there in the world. Because one of the ways you could set up SageMaker is to just make it SageMaker, allow people to stand up step functions or lambdas or like define their own schedules separately. But that leads to a lot of fragmentation and a lot less reusability across projects. So we just wrapped up that migration. It's going well. I think our initial reports are pretty good, but definitely having that centralized visibility has been a huge win for our team.
That sounds like a great philosophy to build around a data team for sure, because I know some places are a little more fragmented and like might even be using different tools than the other team when they could be using one tool and building a better platform around using that tool. Real quick, one thing you brought up was an orchestrator. Could you talk real quick, just like a minute, about what a orchestrator might be in like the context of a data or ML org?
Yeah. So orchestration is sort of this act of like scheduling jobs and processes to run. And usually a lot of times, like you'll use schedule-based runs. So like at midnight UTC, you want some job you want all of your pipelines to kick off. And then at, midway through the day, you're going to kick off another set of pipelines. But it quickly gets much more complex. And there's really 2 sources of complexity that orchestrators are built to handle. One is sort of event-driven triggers. So I want some process to run, maybe like a hook, like like I want to send metrics to Datadog after every completion of a data table creation, or after every training job, right? I want to like get a file and like push it to some metrics monitoring system. So these sort of like event-driven hook pipelines. And then the other complexity is cross-system orchestration, cross-system sort of like coordination. So a lot of times within a system like dbt Cloud or Fivetran or SageMaker or whatever your preferred cloud vendor is, they will have orchestration capabilities. They can schedule things and they can kind of like you could have someone just manage that centrally. But then you lose a lot of visibility and control to the central team. So we wouldn't know what's running and when. And that can be a huge problem if something upstream fails. It becomes very hard to recover from that because you have to scramble and find out, okay, well, what depended on this thing? And usually if it's managed elsewhere, you might have to go like to that team and figure out like, how do we resolve this? What's going to happen? So that's sort of like, I'm very much a believer in the domain-driven ownership. One of our core principles at Whatnot is to move uncomfortably fast, and we want to allow all of the teams that use data to make their own decisions and choose their own tools and move at their own pace. But we have a pretty strict contract that the data platform can't support anything that's not sort of centrally scheduled. So that's sort of our contract with consumers, where if they're going to register it with us, if they're going to orchestrate it through Dagster, our orchestrator, then we can provide support. We can help like alert and inform them if something upstream is broken. But if they just go do it themselves, then that's fine. That's on them. We just don't have the capacity to help very much.
Yeah, I think it makes a lot of sense. And yeah, so there's really cool tools that make it easier, like Daxter, like you said, that you
Yeah.
can implement in your
Airflow is
report.
another one that's like very, very common. And oftentimes, yeah, I mean, one of the chief problems in like ML work is orchestration. And so there's a lot of like ML focused orchestrators that will, log metadata to a common model definition, for example. Or launch a bunch of experiment runs using, serverless architecture or whatever.
You'd mentioned at Whatnot, you do so many different things like live streaming, all the things that go with live streaming, such as chat, the video, and then you also have eBay type. You said kind of like eBay plus Twitch. Each of those have so many interesting components to it, like recommendations and search and things like that. Do you have, I guess, almost like a maybe not a favorite area, but I guess one of the like is any of those specific areas more interesting or more challenging to you?
Recommendation is our primary focus right now as a machine learning team, and that's because recommendation is so fundamental to the both the seller experience and the buyer experience. Where if you can't find the types of streams that you want to get into, you're going to have a bad experience and you're not going to come back. But if we can connect you, there's so much opportunity there, because one of the things about Whatnot that's really, really fun is you feel like you're connecting with the seller. It's so much more personal than looking at eBay listings and things like that. And so there's so much value to be had from a good connection, that's our primary focus as a team. However, like any opportunity you can think of to use, machine learning or data, is out there. Like better analytics dashboards that are in the app that are like looking at really interesting details. You can imagine anything, like sentiment analysis of like that coaches speakers on how they should be like improving their sales tactics. Live stream chat moderation, image detection that can auto classify Pokemon cards just by like waving them in front of the thing, in front of the computer. So personally, I love the image detection world because I have that background in medical image analysis, and so I'm really excited about a future where we have computer vision machine learning products in the product. But I don't think that's quite the highest value use case for our customers yet.
That does sound like a really exciting feature, though. Like I
Yeah.
would love it if if I was selling my Pokemon card collection. I would love to know like if you're or it means like you don't have to do a ton of research yourself potentially if you had old Pokemon cards when you were a kid but you haven't kept up with like what the value is or anything like that. Potentially you could scan it and get some sort of estimate or something like that potentially from Whatnot, which would be really cool.
Yeah, it's one of the things I love about Whatnot is we have a very, very customer focused mindset, and so like everything goes back to the customer experience and also the seller experience, so buyers and sellers. And when I first started, I was like, this goes back to that problem mindset. When I first started, I was like, oh, I'm going to try and do this. I'm going to try and build this like Pokemon card detector. And like, I was able to get like a very basic one going with, PyTorch and like some I can't fast, like quick pre-built neural network. But it's really, the value there can be very, very high, but it's got to be in the right place in the app, right? So if it's a seller onboarding feature, that can be a huge efficiency gain for sellers. So instead of like entering things in manually, it takes them 30 seconds to enter in all of their inventory, and it's just such a win-win. But it's finding the right problems to bring that machine learning solution to. It's not just about the machine learning solution, and the right way to get it into the app too.
Right. I see a couple interesting questions that I think relate to what we're talking to. One is someone's asking if model training is done via SageMaker. So you'd mentioned moving things over to SageMaker. That may not mean the training necessarily.
Yeah, that's a great question. So one of the design principles for our like platform migration was we want data scientists to be able to own the whole life cycle end to end. And that means in a SageMaker world that they can launch and test training jobs right within SageMaker notebooks. And so the way SageMaker works is there's like a studio environment, and then they have these API calls that can launch serverless or like, sort of like provisioned, not serverless, but like on-demand compute jobs. And so the way we've designed it is data scientists will go do their like model building stuff. They'll write their code, they'll commit it to Git, and then they will launch the jobs from the containers or from the notebooks, see the results, make sure they complete, do that whole process. And then they can just copy paste that code into Dagster. And so Dagster, as the orchestrator, serves as our production source of truth, kind of like the gold standard of what's going to happen. And the studio notebook serves as the experimentation environment. If people are going to do like grid searches and stuff off of like, certain runs, they can do all that there. It's just that once it's sort of like the published version lives in Dagster. And so there's a bit of a trade-off there where like the orchestrator is just coming in at the end. But also it means that the data platform team also has to just come at the end. As long as we've set up the infrastructure, the roles, the permissions, the like all of that stuff, then they should be able to just run and just save it when they're ready.
Nice. And I see a really good question about recommendation models in general. Brian asks, are recommendation models growing in size? If so, how does that affect the ops side and platform side?
That's a good question. So they do grow in size. And I will say, I'll be the first to say, like, I don't know. When I joined when I joined Whatnot, I didn't know anything about recommender models. And it's like its whole own world. I mean, I feel totally bamboozled whenever I'm in whenever I get in the weeds with the machine learning scientists on what's actually happening. But yeah, we do have these problems with scale. We have the problem of just how do we serve the recommendations efficiently? And so we've taken a couple of different approaches. We have a high throughput analytical store called Rockset, where in some cases we will serve components of the score, like we'll pre-compute components, and then just allow that system to do lookups on the predictions where necessary. We're also working on deploying SageMaker endpoints directly so that the models can be served and have the predictions run online. And SageMaker, what's nice about SageMaker, one of the reasons we moved to it, is it has all of the sort of configuration available as we need to start tuning these endpoints for performance and for different use cases.
Nice. That was a great question. Thank you, Brian. And I know we're getting close to our around 30-minute mark. And I wanted to ask, we can talk about some more stuff we want, but I wanted to ask before you go, besides everything you've talked about, like I guess it could be in the data engineering world for sure, but is there anything besides just exactly what Whatnot is working on, anything else in the kind of data engineering or ML field that you're really excited about, like any emerging kind of technologies or platforms that you've seen recently?
Yeah, one of the areas of the world I spend a lot of time in is more of the analytics side, and there's some stuff happening around the dbt ecosystem that's very interesting. They call it the semantic layer. And it's this idea that you're going to have all these like data transformation processes. You're going to create definitions for core entities in your that define your business, and that machine learning models, that analytics things, that operational use cases are going to want to use. And what the semantic layer is set up to do is to store definitions for these things in a way that is sort of like dynamically filterable, and which could power all of these different use cases. So the way we're thinking about it is especially around like events and like key metrics that we want to track and optimize for, whether it's for experimentation, machine learning features, or our analytics platform. And I think there's an opportunity there if the data warehouse, sort of like the traditional data warehouse that houses all of these entities, can become much more flexible and intuitive for all of these different stakeholders to get the data that they need that's cut in the right ways for their use case, then it's just a much smaller surface area that the data platform team really has to guard against and make sure is running really well. Because what we were finding was that we just see a lot, even though we're pushing really hard on keeping things centralized, there's just such a entropy, sort of like force towards entropy in all of the data pipelines, all of our data domains, that that things get redefined time and time again. But I'm hoping that this semantic layer thing can really fulfill its promise and be a valuable way to centralize definitions of core entities.
Let's hope so. And if anyone has any other questions, feel free to throw them in the chat right now. But I know we're at our 30 minutes, and I want to mention again just that the hiring link for Whatnot is in the link, or the link for the hiring page is in the description if you're watching this on YouTube or LinkedIn. And then I also just want to say if there's anything else you'd like to mention or add about, it could be working at Whatnot or anything else that you've been working on that you want to tell our audience about.
No, I mean, I think if you're interested in the types of problems that we have, live stream shopping, real-time analytics, real-time, auction analysis. If you're interested in just data problems in general, give us a shout. We're fully remote. We've got a really great world-class team. Would love to have you.
Yeah, that sounds great. Someone asked, how often are your models updated in production? That'll be, I think, the last question we go or we get to before we end the stream today.
It depends on the model. Right now, most of our models are just on daily builds. So we're planning to change that soon, but there's a real cognitive cost to starting to go below 24 hours, 12 hours, 6 hours, especially because we're trying to keep the entire platform tight. And most of the other, we're kind of working from a platform angle to keeping, just like the 24-hour SLA. We're really focused more on the centralization and less on the performance, getting things down lower than 24 hours. That said, we do have a number of models and a number of functionality that is based on real-time signal coming through Kafka. And so the sort of features that are driving those are more in real time.
Awesome. And like I said, I think that's going to be our last question today. We're over our 30 minutes. So again, check out for most of the stuff we've talked about or staying connected with Stephen or the Robust and Responsible AI community. Links are in the description. There's a Slack channel you can join, introduce yourself in there. And if you have any other questions, you should be able to contact either of us, I think, from links below. So thank you, everyone, for tuning in. And thank you so much, Stephen, for coming on.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me, Sage.
And I'm going to go ahead and end the stream. So goodbye, everyone. And hopefully I'll talk to some of you all later. And then there's the awkward minute.